On October 15, 1980, Sarah Chen boarded the 11:47 p.m. train from Chicago to Milwaukee. Security cameras captured her stepping onto car number 3, clutching a brown leather satchel and checking her phone nervously. When the train pulled into Milwaukee at 1:23 a.m., every passenger stepped off, except Sarah. She was gone. No trace, no explanation. Just an empty seat and a mystery that would consume everyone who tried to solve it. The autumn night was crisp, with a cold wind cutting through the Chicago station. Sarah had spent 3 days in the Windy City, attending what she called important business meetings, though no one could later verify exactly who she had met with or why. She wore her favorite navy blue coat, the one her mother had bought her for her birthday just 2 months earlier. She carried only that brown leather satchel and a small overnight bag. What happened in the next hour and 36 minutes would become one of the most baffling disappearances in railroad history. A case that would span decades, involve federal investigators, and leave more questions than answers. This is the story of Sarah Chen, the girl who vanished in 1980, and the dark secrets that may have died with her. Sarah Chen was not the type of person who disappeared. Born in Milwaukee on March 12, 1957, she was the daughter of Dr. James Chen, a respected cardiologist, and Margaret Chen, a high school English teacher. Sarah was their only child, and they had raised her with a deep appreciation for order, responsibility, and truth. At 23, Sarah worked as a junior accountant at Hartwell & Associates, a mid-sized firm in downtown Milwaukee. Her colleagues described her as meticulous, punctual, and incredibly bright. She had graduated summa cum laude from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in accounting and mathematics. Sarah lived alone in a small but tidy apartment on the east side of Milwaukee, just 10 minutes from her parents' house. She was known for her routines. Every morning, Sarah would arrive at work exactly at 7:45 a.m. with a cup of black coffee and a plain bagel. She ate lunch at her desk while reviewing financial documents. She left work promptly at 5:30 p.m. and would call her mother every evening at 8 p.m. sharp. Sarah had never missed a family dinner, never forgotten a birthday, and never, ever disappeared without telling someone where she was going, which is what made her trip to Chicago so unusual. On October 12, 1980, Sarah had requested 3 days off work, her first vacation time in over a year. When her supervisor asked about her plans, Sarah simply said she had personal business to attend to in Chicago. She booked a room at the Palmer House Hotel under her own name and told her parents she would be back by the weekend. She seemed nervous, almost excited, but wouldn't elaborate on the purpose of her trip. Her mother, Margaret, would later recall their last conversation with heartbreaking clarity. Sarah called me on the evening of October 14th. She sounded different, like she was carrying a heavy secret. She said she had discovered something important about her father's work, something that people had tried to keep hidden. When I asked her what she meant, she just said, "I'll explain everything when I get home, Mom. Some things are worth fighting for, even if they're dangerous." Those were the last words Margaret Chen ever heard from her daughter. Sarah's disappearance hit the Milwaukee Police Department on October 18, 1980, 3 days after she was supposed to return home. Her parents had already contacted the Chicago police, the railroad company, and every hospital between Chicago and Milwaukee. The lead detective was 28 years old and thought he'd seen everything. He was wrong. The challenges were immediate and deeply puzzling. Sarah's room at the Palmer House Hotel told a strange story. Her clothes were neatly packed, her toiletries organized in the bathroom, but scattered across the bed were dozens of documents, photocopies of medical records, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be correspondence between doctors and pharmaceutical companies. The hotel staff remembered Sarah clearly. She had spent most of her time in Chicago in her room, making phone calls and meeting with visitors in the lobby. The concierge recalled at least 3 different people asking for Sarah by name over those 3 days: a young woman with red hair, an older gentleman in an expensive suit, and a woman in her 40s who claimed to be Sarah's aunt, though the Chen family had no such relative. Sarah's train ticket had been purchased at 11:15 p.m. on October 15th, just 32 minutes before departure. The ticket agent remembered her because she had seemed agitated, constantly looking over her shoulder while counting out exact change. She had specifically requested a seat in car 3 towards the back, away from other passengers. But here's where the mystery deepened. Sarah's phone had gone dead somewhere between Chicago and Milwaukee. Her last GPS ping showed the train moving at normal speed through Kenosha. Her credit cards hadn't been used since October 14th. Her apartment remained exactly as she had left it, keys still in her purse, which was found in her Chicago hotel room. Even her car sat untouched in the Palmer House parking garage. The railroad investigation was thorough. The train made 4 stops: Glenview, Sturtevant, Kenosha, and Milwaukee. They checked every station, every platform, every surrounding area within a 5-mile radius. They interviewed every passenger they could locate, every conductor, every station agent. They brought in search dogs, checked every dumpster, every abandoned building, every body of water along the route. Nothing. It was like Sarah Chen had simply evaporated. But the most unsettling discovery came from the train's passenger manifest. Sarah Chen had purchased a ticket, had been seen boarding the train, but according to the conductor's digital scanner, her ticket was never validated. The electronic system showed no record of her journey. Officially, according to the railroad's computers, Sarah had never been on that train at all. That's when investigators knew they weren't dealing with a simple missing person case. Someone with access to the railroad systems had deliberately erased Sarah's presence from the official record. This wasn't a random disappearance. This was a carefully orchestrated operation. The investigation expanded to include the FBI, who were particularly interested in the documents found in Sarah's hotel room. Many of them dated back to the mid-1960s and involved her father's work at Milwaukee General Hospital. Dr. James Chen had died in a car accident in 1965, when Sarah was only 8 years old. The accident had been ruled straightforward at the time. Icy roads, late-night single-vehicle crash. But the documents Sarah had uncovered suggested something far more sinister. The breakthrough came when investigators traced Sarah's phone calls from the Palmer House. She had made 17 calls over 3 days to numbers across the country. Most were to medical facilities, pharmaceutical companies, and law firms. But 3 calls stood out. They were to numbers that had been disconnected for over a decade. Sarah's investigation had led her deep into the world of medical research from the 1960s, a time when ethical oversight was minimal and pharmaceutical companies operated with little regulation. Her father, Dr. James Chen, had been involved in experimental cardiac research at Milwaukee General Hospital, working with new drugs that promised to revolutionize heart disease treatment. The documents Sarah had gathered painted a disturbing picture. Dr. Chen had apparently discovered that one of the experimental drugs he was testing was causing severe side effects in patients, effects that were being covered up by the pharmaceutical company funding the research. According to correspondence Sarah had found, her father had threatened to go public with his findings. Investigators found Sarah's notebook in her hotel room, filled with her meticulous handwriting. She had been tracking patterns, connecting dots that had been hidden for 15 years. Names, dates, patient records, financial transactions. Sarah had built a case that would have destroyed careers and possibly led to criminal charges. The notebook revealed that Sarah had made contact with 3 key people during her Chicago trip. The first was Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, a former colleague of her father's who had retired to Chicago in 1978. Dr. Vasquez had been one of the few people who supported Dr. Chen's concerns about the experimental drug trials. Investigators interviewed Dr. Vasquez a week after Sarah's disappearance. She was terrified, barely willing to speak to them even with police protection. She confirmed that Sarah had visited her on October 13th and that she had given Sarah copies of documents she had kept hidden for 15 years. Documents that proved the pharmaceutical company had known about the drug's deadly side effects and had ordered Dr. Chen to keep quiet. The second person Sarah had met was Marcus Thompson, a former patient of her father's, who had survived the experimental drug trials. Thompson had been searching for Dr. Chen for years, wanting to thank him for secretly switching his medication to a safer alternative. Thompson told investigators that Dr. Chen had risked his career to protect his patients and that several other doctors involved in the trials had died under mysterious circumstances. Thompson's testimony was crucial. He told police that Dr. Chen had been receiving death threats in the weeks before his accident. The car crash wasn't an accident. It was murder, made to look like an accident. And Sarah had figured it out. Tucked. Third person Sarah had contacted was the most dangerous. Victoria Sterling, a former executive at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company that had funded her father's research. Sterling had agreed to meet Sarah in Chicago, claiming she had information about Dr. Chen's death that would set the record straight. Hotel security footage showed Sarah meeting with Sterling in the Palmer House lobby on the evening of October 14th. They spoke for nearly an hour, with Sterling handing Sarah a thick manila envelope. After Sterling left, Sarah spent the rest of the evening in her room, making frantic phone calls. Police tried to locate Victoria Sterling after Sarah's disappearance, but she had vanished too. Her apartment in Chicago was cleared out, her bank accounts closed, her phone disconnected. It was like she had never existed. But investigators did find something interesting in Sarah's hotel room: a business card for a private investigator named David Walsh. Walsh had been hired by Sterling 6 months earlier to investigate what had happened to the doctors involved in the Meridian drug trials. His findings were shocking. Of the 12 doctors who had worked on the project, 8 had died under suspicious circumstances between 1965 and 1978. Car accidents, house fires, apparent suicides, heart attacks in healthy young men. Dr. Chen had been the first to die, but he certainly wasn't the last. Walsh told investigators that Sterling had been trying to expose the conspiracy for years, but she was being watched. She believed that Meridian Pharmaceuticals had hired professional killers to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose their cover-up. When Sarah contacted her, Sterling saw an opportunity to finally bring the truth to light. But Sterling had underestimated how far Meridian would go to protect their secrets. The company had survived the 1960s scandal and had grown into a multi-billion-dollar corporation by 1980. They had too much to lose to let Sarah Chen destroy them. According to Walsh's investigation, Meridian had been monitoring Sarah for months before her Chicago trip. They knew about her inquiries into her father's death, her request for medical records, her attempts to contact other families of the deceased doctors. When she finally gathered enough evidence to expose them, they had to act. The plan was sophisticated and brutal. They would let Sarah collect all the evidence, let her think she was close to solving the mystery, and then eliminate her along with anyone who had helped her. Sterling's meeting with Sarah was a trap, a way to identify exactly how much Sarah knew and who else might be involved. What happened in the final hours of Sarah's life has been pieced together through witness testimony, physical evidence, and the confession of a man who wouldn't speak until 30 years after the crime. At 11:47 p.m. on October 15, 1980, Sarah boarded the train to Milwaukee, carrying evidence that could have brought down one of America's largest pharmaceutical companies. She was being followed by at least 2 people, professionals hired by Meridian to ensure she never made it home. Sarah chose seat 12A in car 3, near the back of the train where she thought she would be safe. She was nervous but determined, clutching the brown leather satchel that contained copies of all the documents she had gathered. According to the elderly passenger sitting in the front of the car, Sarah spent the first part of the journey organizing her papers, as if preparing for a presentation. The elderly passenger, Robert Morrison, was 84 years old at the time and had been visiting his daughter in Chicago. He had perfect recall of that night, probably because it was the most terrifying experience of his life. He watched Sarah for the entire journey, fascinated by her obvious nervousness and the way she kept checking the documents in her satchel. At 12:15 a.m., somewhere between Glenview and Sturtevant, Morrison noticed that the train had begun slowing down, even though they weren't approaching a station. Looking out the window, he could see a car parked alongside the tracks with its headlights on. The train came to a complete stop for approximately 3 minutes. During this stop, Morrison saw 2 people board the train through a door at the rear of car 3, a man in a dark coat, and a woman with short blonde hair. They walked directly to Sarah's seat, and Morrison could hear them speaking quietly to her. Sarah appeared frightened but followed them toward the back of the train without resistance. Morrison told police he heard voices from the rear of the car for about 10 minutes, then silence. When the train started moving again, he noticed that Sarah's seat was empty. Her satchel was gone, but there was something dark on the floor near where she had been sitting. Morrison was too frightened to investigate that night, but he contacted police as soon as he reached Milwaukee. When investigators returned to examine the train, they found traces of blood on the floor of car 3, along with threads from Sarah's navy blue coat caught on a seat frame. They also found something else, a small piece of paper with Sarah's handwriting that had apparently fallen from her satchel. The note read, "If something happens to me, look for the connection between Meridian, Dr. Vasquez, and the 1965 trials. The truth is worth dying for." The FBI investigation that followed was extensive but ultimately fruitless. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had covered their tracks too well. The executives involved in the 1960s conspiracy were either dead or had disappeared. The company's current leadership claimed no knowledge of past wrongdoing and threatened legal action against anyone making unfounded accusations. But in 2010, 30 years after Sarah's disappearance, a man named Thomas Bradley contacted the FBI with information about the case. Bradley had been a low-level employee at a private security firm that Meridian had contracted in 1980. His job had been to dispose of evidence and clean up loose ends. Bradley confessed that he had been part of the team that boarded the train that night. His role was to search Sarah's belongings while his partners dealt with her. According to Bradley, Sarah was taken off the train during that 3-minute stop and driven to a remote location where she was questioned about what she knew and who else was involved. Bradley's confession was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak for Sarah's family. He confirmed that Sarah had been murdered that night, but he claimed he didn't know where her body had been disposed of. He said the operation was run by professionals who made sure that no trace of their victim would ever be found. Bradley also revealed that Sarah hadn't been the only target that night. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez was found dead in her Chicago apartment 3 days after Sarah's disappearance, apparently from a heart attack. Marcus Thompson died in a house fire 2 weeks later. Victoria Sterling was never seen again. The evidence Sarah had gathered was destroyed, the witnesses were eliminated, and the truth died with them. Meridian Pharmaceuticals continued to operate and grow, eventually being acquired by an even larger corporation in the 1990s. The executives responsible for Sarah's murder were never identified or prosecuted. Bradley served 8 years in prison for his role in the conspiracy, but he was just a small part of a much larger operation. The people who ordered Sarah's death, who planned the cover-up, who destroyed evidence and eliminated witnesses, they were never held accountable. 43 years later, Sarah Chen's disappearance remains officially unsolved, though everyone involved in the investigation knows exactly what happened to her. She was murdered because she discovered the truth about her father's death and threatened to expose a conspiracy that had been hidden for 15 years. Sarah's case became a catalyst for changes in how pharmaceutical companies are regulated and how medical research is conducted. Her sacrifice wasn't entirely in vain. The reforms that followed prevented other families from suffering the same fate. But for Margaret Chen, who died in 2001 still hoping her daughter would come home, justice was never served. The lead detective on Sarah's case retired from the Milwaukee Police Department in 2005, but he never stopped working on it. It consumed him for 25 years, cost him his marriage, and gave him nightmares that he still has today. But he couldn't let it go, because Sarah deserved better. She deserved justice, and she deserved to be remembered as the brave young woman who died trying to protect others from the same fate that killed her father. Sarah's story is more than just a tale of corporate greed and murder. It's a reminder of how dangerous the truth can be when it threatens powerful interests. In 1980, a pharmaceutical company was willing to kill to protect their profits. They murdered doctors who tried to expose their crimes, eliminated witnesses who could testify against them, and destroyed evidence that could have saved lives. Sarah Chen was just 23 years old when she died, but she had already shown more courage than most people display in a lifetime. She knew the risks when she began investigating her father's death. She understood that she was putting herself in danger by confronting powerful enemies. But she also knew that some truths are worth dying for. The documents that Sarah gathered, the connections she made, the patterns she uncovered, all of it was destroyed when she was murdered. But the impact of her investigation lived on. Other families began asking questions about their loved ones who had died under suspicious circumstances. Journalists started investigating pharmaceutical companies more aggressively. Regulators began demanding more transparency and accountability. Sarah's mother, Margaret, established the Sarah Chen Foundation in 1985, dedicated to supporting families of victims of corporate crime and advocating for stronger regulations in the pharmaceutical industry. The foundation has helped dozens of families seek justice and has contributed to important reforms in medical research ethics. Margaret Chen never gave up hope that her daughter's killers would be brought to justice, but she also never stopped believing that Sarah's death had meaning. In her final interview before her own death in 2001, Margaret said, "Sarah always believed that the truth would set people free. She died trying to free all of us from the lies that had been hidden for so long. I just hope that someday, someone will free her truth from the darkness where her killers buried it." If you have any information about Sarah Chen's disappearance, or if you know anything about the conspiracy that led to her death, please contact the Milwaukee Police Department. The case remains officially open, and there is no statute of limitations on murder. More importantly, if you work in an industry where you see evidence of wrongdoing that could harm innocent people, remember Sarah Chen. Remember that speaking truth to power requires courage, but that silence in the face of evil makes us all complicit. Sarah died because she refused to be silent. We honor her memory by refusing to let her story be forgotten. 43 years have passed since Sarah stepped onto that train, carrying evidence that powerful people were willing to kill for. The world has changed dramatically since 1980, but some things remain the same. Corporations still put profits over people. The powerful still silence those who threaten them, and ordinary citizens still have to choose between safety and truth. Sarah Chen chose truth, knowing it would cost her everything. She chose to fight for justice even when she knew the fight was hopeless. She chose to honor her father's memory by exposing the conspiracy that had destroyed their family. In the end, Sarah's disappearance became more than just another unsolved case. It became a symbol of resistance against corruption and a reminder that some mysteries are worth solving, no matter how long it takes. The girl who vanished in 1980 is still missing, but her story lives on. And sometimes, that's the most powerful legacy of all. Some mysteries are never solved, but they're never forgotten either.